Okay, folks, so we're going to get started. My goal was to deliver some helpful information in the span of about 15-20 minutes. We're going to have time for your questions at the end of that. I want to say that in the form that I provided where I asked, did you have any questions, folks were extremely thoughtful. I have enough questions to keep me going in sessions for about 6 months. And in fact, I'll repeat the end. I'm considering adding some further sessions. So again, thank you for the feedbacks. Very, very helpful. Let me just get my chat back up in front of me so I can monitor questions coming up, and we will get started. So here's a scene I'm sure all of you have seen before. I was in the grocery store the other day, and of course, the cashiers all have these plexiglass shields in front of you. And while interacting with the individual, he said something to me which I could not understand. And you know, sometimes when you've heard it, but your brain takes a couple seconds to pick up. So I deciphered it. And then, oh, okay, I want to respond to him. And my brain said, hey, but if you try to talk to him through the glass, he's not going to hear you, just like you couldn't hear him. So what did I do? I leaned way over to the right, around the glass, to respond. Thought this was wonderful. I was being friendly. I am grateful that no one attacked me in line because it occurred to me only later that I had automatically done something I really should not have done. And so this change that we're all surrounded by can be extremely difficult to navigate. And yet here we have an example of what to some might look like an active attempt to resist was in fact just my instincts kicking in. So here we are in this new reality of social distancing, self-isolation, with people complying to various levels. What do we do? How do we get people to embrace change? Well, we certainly know that not everyone is on board. We're seeing lots of these things. And the first thing I want to remind us is that even when we see 4,300 complaints, that is but a drop in the bucket of the vast volume of people in a single city that are being asked to do something different. And I actually wonder how many of those 4,300 might actually be duplicates. So the reality is the vast majority of people do comply. They get on board with the change. And some even go a bit farther. I was reading some of the news out in New Zealand where the police commissioner there said she was very grateful for how people were embracing the changes that we all needed to do. And he said this, and the passion at which some people are helping others to comply. Passion indeed. There have been some negative incidents out there of folks really getting on each other's cases around complying. So why is that? Why do we have folks that both resist and others that get so far on board that they're actually creating negative situations? And this really is fundamentally about control. One of my colleagues said it best when they said, recognize that the fundamental problem with change is no one likes to be told what to do. And when I repeat that, the audience often, I see heads nodding and it resonates of, that's exactly it. But we don't all respond in the same way. We have those who will defy the request. You need to do something different. I need to self-isolate. Do I really? And they're asserting that I have power and I'm going to decide and I'm going to do what I want. How many times have we heard that phrase, well, it's a free country? And it's really just pushback. I mean, what does that mean? It means I have the right, I have the power, and I will make the decision. Don't tell me what to do. They may not have a need to get out and get into groups and defy blatantly, but they do it to assert the fact that they still have this level of power, and they want to preserve it and demonstrate that they have it. You can't make them do anything. They are a small minority. This is where we get more people. They comply. They choose to surrender their power, and it's based on belief. So I believe that when the authority, when government, when Major Dean Henshaw stands up and says, this is what we must do, then that's what I will do because I've been asked to do it. So they surrender, they subjugate it, they offer it to someone else and say, this is right. More commonly, you have folks that commit because they've looked at the information. So like myself, I'm sure you're reading a lot of news in various channels, and you assemble that and say, this makes good sense. I recognize that I have the choice, but I am choosing to obey because I am convinced. And I certainly don't want some of the consequences that we're concerned about. I want to be part of that group that is, in fact, endeavoring to flatten the curve. And then, as I mentioned, on the far end of this, folks go as far as to enforce. So I'm going to help others comply. I feel so strongly about it. Now, this is not necessarily all bad. If we expand this to change we're trying to make happen within our organizations, we want this. This is when culture is shifting and people say, this is the way that we work in our organization. And if you're not willing to abide by those same behaviors, then perhaps you don't belong here. Now, that can be bad if you have a toxic culture, in which case you need to fix it, of course. But we do want folks to get to a place where they are not only committed, but they're willing to influence their peers to fall in line in a positive way. So fundamentally, we are talking about control, and this is especially pertinent when we are forcing change upon people, which is certainly the case today as we're talking about isolation protocols. Now, this some of you have seen before. When I'm working with organizations and we're trying to assess how people will respond to a change, I use two factors to rapidly determine that. The first is, how desirable is the change? Because the more desirable, the more likely people are to support it, less likely to resist. The second dimension is really critical. How complex is it? So can I envision myself embracing this change successfully, or are there a number of hurdles I'm going to face which make it difficult for me to comply? Now, consider, we've been giving these suggestions around what we should do. So 2 meters away. And by the way, as a hockey player, I have to say, I don't know of any hockey sticks that are 2 meters long. So just saying. But beyond that, we have these guidelines which say we need to keep a distance and we need to clean our surfaces and wash our hands regularly. And on the surface of that, we would say, well, that isn't that complex. It's pretty simple. But because of the restriction of freedoms, it's not that desirable. No one wants to be spending all this extra time at home. We don't want our children at home when they could be at school learning. It's producing all sorts of challenges for parents. Now, I will say, yes, there's been benefits, but overall, we would rather have all the freedoms that we had yesterday. So I can go and I can take my daughter with me to the store. There's not a concern about further spreading of the virus. So on the face of it, low complexity, but low desirability. So what do we do in that case? I'm gonna back up one slide here. In that bottom left quadrant, we still try to convince people, encourage them that this is the right thing to do. But if they do not get on board, then we're going to mandate that, listen, it's not optional anymore. And that's why we have fines coming into play. So, if you're not going to comply, then we're going to give you these punishments that come into effect. Here's the trick when we're asking ourselves, well, why do people resist what seems like a simple change? We have to ask this question. What would cause a person to perceive a change as more complex? To you or I, fairly simple. Yes, I can do these behaviors. So what drives someone to actually push it into that right quadrant and say, for me, this is much more complex? So here are some factors to consider. On the left, we have these external ones. So there are rewards and there are punishments. So I want to emphasize the rewards. You know what? It's actually a healthy thing for us to be washing our hands more. We should have been doing this all along. We have our institutional authority. We already commented on telling us this is the right thing to do. But the most important component in that left-hand side is the influencers. So early on when we were getting into lockdown, I read an article where they interviewed some people who professed that they had gotten onto a plane to come home despite the fact that they were already feeling symptoms of what would likely be coronavirus. Why did they do that? And of course, on condition of anonymity, they revealed that the pressure they felt was so high coming from friends and family. Remember, fear level is extremely high. So think of a parent who says, I don't care, get on that plane because I don't know what level of support you're going to get in that country. And what if the worst happens, that our time is limited? I want you home. So immense amount of pressure on individuals to do something which they might not have normally done. In addition, influencing coming in from trusted individuals. The more credibility they have, the better. So hopefully we're getting positive influence, but if we're tuned into folks that are steering us in the wrong direction and we trust them, it is an enormous level of pressure to do the wrong thing. So these are factors which can push people towards either defy or comply. And of course, what's happening in the media as well, and why fake news is such a problem today, because people read that and turn what they read into action. But look how big the list is on the right. Here are the things inside myself which drive me in a certain direction. Now, you might be questioning, why is culture on the list that comes from outside? Yes, I agree, but it becomes important only when we internalize it. So if our culture deems that we respond to authority, then that may play out very well in this scenario. Consider desire. There are certain things I want to do, and if I'm not convinced that this is really a problem, or perhaps the government's pulling the wool over our eyes, then I'm more likely to defy. If I have a commitment to certain things, so I'm a runner, or in my personal case, I love going to the gym, and it's very difficult for me to stay at home and continue the workout that I've been doing because I have a goal to maintain a certain weight or a certain level of physical fitness. Yes, there are other ways, but they're more challenging. My value set. We know an unfortunate reality is that for those with particular religious persuasions continue to get together in groups, that opens up us to spreading the virus. I was reading how the Hutterite community is very challenged right now because social distancing is so foreign to them. Our habits, the history, what we feel must be true based on our past experience, our education level, our personality, if we tend to see the glass as half empty, will determine how we might respond to a change. Overall state of mind, and most important today, I think, emotional reserves. My wife works in healthcare and was sharing with me just how some seemingly innocuous events, things that you wouldn't think twice about normally, really create conflict. People react strongly. And I said, that's absolutely tiredness and fear, which I've got at the bottom of the list there because it tends to trump everything. When people are afraid, they will do certain things and ignore logic. It just shuts down our thinking process. Mental health, our finances. We know folks will continue to go to work. We've heard them say it, even if they're sick, because they cannot afford to lose a day's pay. And so that's why the government is stepping in with some of the measures that they're offering. So all these factors are internal. So as change leaders, what do we do? Well, we have to acknowledge the fact that change is a contact sport. Even though I work at the group level, we're looking for various departments to change what they do. We're looking for an entire neighborhood to change their practices. The reality is it takes individuals to make that move. So I can focus my efforts on a group basis, but I can't forget I have to pay attention to the individual. This is where it gets tricky. So for most of the work that we do, we can focus on the group. And if it's 99% we believe are going to comply, then we might want to ignore the 1% and focus on the others that are least likely to comply. How do you do that? Because I can't speak to every individual. In our organizations, this is what managers are for. We must get our mid-level managers on board. We spend one-on-one time with them to equip them and say, this is how we need people to move. I want to give you some strategies around coaching individuals so you can help them adapt. I spent time in the last few weeks speaking with groups and talking about, well, what do you do when a person in front of you breaks down in tears? And I guarantee that is happening more and more in our organizations. And I'll tell you, the wrong thing to do is to start spewing a number of strategies to them. It's wrong. We have to be in the moment and be willing to empathize with them and share some of that emotion and the fact that we're feeling some of those same things too. I, as a change leader, cannot do that with every single person in my organization. I need ambassadors. I need folks to help me do that. So we equip our middle layer to do those things. And these are, I would say, tougher and more significant conversations than we've ever had before in our organizations. But we must do this. We must do this. So some of the practical, tactical, I recognize or appreciate someone asking in the questions, what are the tactics we can do? We can ramp up the rewards. So yes, punishment is sometimes required. There are consequences for behavior that's out of line. But we have to pivot people's orientation towards what's good. Now I'll speak a bit more about that. Reducing the fear where you can by providing safety. Reminding folks, you're safe here in this space. I remind my kids, as long as we're following the protocols, you're safe here. Your chances of catching this stupid thing are infinitesimally small, as long as we do what we've been asked to do. Providing facts from reputable, credible sources. And there are times when we do need to say, you can trust me. So if I'm the one that's been gathering all this important information, and I am someone that's credible to my team, my group, say, you know what, trust me, folks, I've been going through all this stuff, and I can reassure you we are in a good space, or that this plan forward is going to work. So we can rely on that. We also work to increase the level of perceived control that people have. Now, I've got perceived in there because control is not always real, but we have to provide ways that people envision a level of control. What do I mean by that? Well, first of all, the best, most practical thing is, can I involve them in some way? Let's take our virus situation. So we are giving all these limitations and constraints to people, but we can also say, here's what you can do. Here's how you can help your neighbor. Check in, leave something on the doorstep, hand off some wipes that they might require. These are things that you can do. And creating the ability to take action helps people perceive I have a bit of control over what I do and how I can help others. Focus on what is predictable. That is not easy right now because there's a lot that's not predictable. But if I can say, here's what you can expect tomorrow. You're going to get up in the morning. You're going to have some of the same tasks you have today, and you're going to be able to perform them. Let's do one day at a time. That is extremely helpful in terms of fostering a sense of control. I can ignore some of the chaos around me if I get focused on the steps I need to take today to do what I need to do. Reframe to decisions that they can make. It's related to what I just said. These are decisions you can do today to protect yourself or to ensure your future is a good one. And then shift perception is something bigger. I'm going to spend more time on this, but I want to ask you, here is the latest quote that came from Dr. Dina Hinshaw. The virus has shown how much our individual actions, no matter how small, can impact the lives of others and the tragic consequences that can result. We are all in this together, and we all have a role to play in keeping each other safe. What stands out from you from that comment? And I'm looking at the chat box just to see your reactions. What do you pick up from that statement that's of particular significance in how she's made this statement? And while you're thinking about that, I'd say, there is a hugely positive case study in the way that Dr. Hinshaw has addressed people within Alberta about the virus and what we're dealing with. So good, shared responsibility. So it's not just a matter of saying we're in this together, but we all have a role to play. And role to play, as someone's pointed out, gives people control. Thank you, Kara. Reminding folks we're all in this together. That has become more than just words these days. So very important. Yes, you've hit again, the perceived control. Thanks, Lyle. Appealing to a sense of humanity. That's wonderful. I'm glad someone pulled that out because, I recently posted something on my blog around how Starbucks has done such a good job of communicating what they're doing. But the richness of the language that they use is significant. Talking about courage, they tap into the human spirit. And that activates people. You can make a difference. Yes, and again, emphasizing what power people have. Yeah, and tragic consequences. Looking ahead, if you don't fall in line, let's be real about the fact that this has a real negative aspect. It's a very good model for how we need to communicate within our organizations. Thanks, everyone, for offering your input. So before I wrap with a couple thoughts, consider Amazon versus healthcare. Amazon right now is seeing people complaining. We had a sick out at Whole Foods, people walking off the job saying we're not being treated well enough. We're being put at risk every day. This is an essential service, what Amazon is doing. There are people relying on what Amazon can do because they can't get out or too scared to get out. Critical. Healthcare, by contrast, people keep showing up. We're all reading this in the news about how these people who are basically facing direct contact with the virus on a daily basis, and I know because I'm close to it too, still go, why? Why do they do that? Because they're convinced about the importance of the cause. They're convinced about the importance of serving fellow humanity. So in terms of tactics, I want to leave you with a couple thoughts. One is we have to connect the dots for individuals. With any task, that little mouse click there, whatever you do on a daily basis, or whether you are thinking about the aspect of self-isolation and keeping our distance, I can connect the dots between every single one of those tasks and how it impacts someone on the other end, even if they're miles or a country away. So when we're considering the change we're asking people to do, whether it's within an organization or it's in the public space, how does what you're doing impact client, customer, our community, our country? These are extremely significant, and Dr. Hinshaw's quote gets at that very thing. As an example, World Economic Forum just put out this note. It was sent out to 140 CEOs. I want to point out the fact that in the middle, we have some bullets. To employees, our principle is to keep you safe. That's the number one thing that we are committed to in terms of principles. Look what is last. To our shareholders, long-term viability, it's last. This emphasizes the importance of humanity. We will continue our sustainability efforts. There's more I could say about that, but we're low on time. But again, here, we must all bond together. We pledge to stand at society's service. Powerful language, powerful. If you're thinking about just chucking a memo out the door around coronavirus, please think twice. Call me. I'll help you. So, wrapping up, why do people resist? Because it's hard to feel a lack of control. So what do we need to do? We approach these things first with compassion. Fear is real, pain is real. And recognizing that we're sharing that, very critical. And then we can have a conversation. Once I've made a connection, explain, I'm feeling some of that too, we can talk about the realities and I can provide some facts you might want to consider. I also want to bring cause to the forefront. Why are we doing this? Our customers still matter. I know it's hard to get up in the morning and execute these mundane things that seem inconsequential to you, but people are still relying on us. And from that, I can start to promote change. I do want to emphasize, I said in some of my notes, I'm not here to sell anything. That is absolutely true. The connections I put on the bottom right are just more free resources. There's lots of stuff out there, and I'm happy to share. I saw a number of people sign up for my newsletter. I send stuff out every week. And the intent is to bolster our leaders and help our community. So I am opening up for questions. While you're thinking about that, look at the number of questions that have come in. I have 3 pages of them. And if I don't have someone write something in, I'm going to address some of these. But I know we did have some. Let me just rewind. Okay, from John, can you address a reaction we've seen, overreaction, and express desire to completely isolate from the workplace as they see risks with any interaction, no matter the distance from others? You know, as a joke, which isn't that funny, you know, I was on a call and had my video on, and then I backed up the camera so that I looked farther away. So, you know, we're practicing social distancing online. But again, that is very much a real consideration for people. They are afraid. And until we address the fear, you're not going to get by that. So, John, it's a great question. And I would say it's going back to that element of expressing compassion about it and recognizing that you may not change that perception of just, it's too risky. Part of what we have to factor in as leaders around change is it's not only complexity and desire that we consider, there's also the element of risk. So even when it's low complexity, and even though I don't like it, or maybe I do like it, it's desirable, if there was a high risk of failure, or in this case, the consequences of catching the virus are extreme, you may not move that. And so all we can do is express compassion, understanding around that, and then try to find ways to accommodate that. And hopefully, I always like to ask the other individual, you know what, there's work we're still needed to do. How can we do that? What suggestions do you have? Folks, I'm aware we're just 2 minutes away from the end of time. I will stay a bit longer answering questions that come up if you wish to stay. This will be recorded, and I will share it out afterwards. Karina, great comment. I think that more individual societies, individualistic, will need more of a what's in it for me messaging. Yeah, so when I talk about that rewards and punishment, you hold those. The rewards aspect, that's the what's in it for me, the benefits, they do have an impact. We have to consider the society, the culture in which we live. Some of those things have more weight than others. It depends on the individual, but absolutely it makes sense to bring benefit statements to the fore. Just scanning for other questions here. Okay, going to my list. You're welcome to add more as you wish. And I see some people are having to leave. That's fine. Appreciate you coming today and spending a bit of time with me. This question, bottom right, I thought was intriguing. How do I help influence change when other teams, HR and comms, are very laser focused on crisis communications and not other areas of managing change? There are other questions in here that get at how do you get people's attention? It is very difficult. I will first say priorities. So if you need to get out the door, telling people about what actions are being taken, what we need to do around the virus, then that is number one priority. So period. So other things may need to move to the side, and some changes may need to be deferred because folks don't have the energy or the focus. Now, I have a personal opinion about this, and I think this is absolutely one of the best times to implement change because things are so disrupted. You have to do that in a very careful manner, but something I believe, and I'll be speaking that into session 5. These numbers that you see at along the margin are upcoming sessions where I'll be speaking to some of these questions. Where you've got other teams that are focused, you may need to wait. You may need to work with them to see if we could insert something that's still important in the organization. Or you may need to find a completely different channel to get people's attention because they're so focused on what's coming out of the virus. So a couple thoughts for you. See if there's any others I want to kick off. How do I keep my team engaged? One of the most common questions I've been getting, and you can see it near the top as well, communication and working with remote teams. The need for communication is absolutely going up. And we need to continue having a very frequent rhythm of communications. I'm just responding to a question. Someone asked whether I'm sharing the slides, and the answer is yes. not great at multitasking. Sorry, folks. So communication rhythm with teams. And this can be done in so many different ways. One thing I've started doing is when I'm on a virtual call, we've got lots of people today, but I might say, if it's a smaller group, show me your mug. I love seeing what people have and holding that up in front of them. Folks, I'm going to start my video so you can see me and know there's a real person here. But interesting to see what people have. I was just on a call with someone who had a really interesting set of items in their background, and that's a point of communication. So we find ways to connect, and there has to be room on our calls for both the work, the business, and for us to communicate as individuals and connect. That brings a smile to my face when I think about it, even though I'm not talking to someone else individually, but I feel a bit more closer to them by having seen what's in their background and what's important to them. Do inject humor into your calls, more so than you ever have before. Pull a Dilbert offline, one of my favorites. So a cartoon, a comic strip, something funny you've seen on Facebook that makes people smile. That not only is good for us, it's good practice, it helps recharge our batteries. So when capacity is running low, absolutely we want to do some laughter, humor. It's amazing how quickly that can help refill the tank. All right. You can see more questions about remote work. There's a really long comment on the right. Why did 10 to 15% of our employees and other Albertans self-isolate for 14 days? I'll summarize this, without being asked. So they jumped the gun in terms of that. You can see down here, they couldn't avail themselves of particular benefit. They just did it and took a hit for it potentially. Because some people are gathering data early, there was all the information available. You could see what was happening in China, and some will look to the future and say, I can see what's coming, I can see what the risk is, I'm going to take action now. This is a critical question because we want more of those people that are willing to take initiative when they recognize something's coming or there's an opportunity we can take advantage of. So a question I would pose back to this group, take it away with you, is that how are you enabling people at every level to contribute to what we might call continuous improvement? I've got an idea, I see an opportunity, I'm concerned about, and here's something we can do about it. That's extremely powerful. And when I can retell that story in my organization, I start shifting the culture to one of more openness. So I love this question. So thank you to whoever contributed it. Again, watching the time, looks like we're okay. I can take a couple more questions. I appreciate lots of thank yous, which is good. So I'm glad I started these. What else do we have? Oh, what is a good fundraising strategy for a nonprofit organization? It's funny that someone asked that because I've been giving this some thought. Your fundraising strategy is to stop asking for money. Your fundraising strategy is to reach out to your volunteers and your donors and ask how they can do things in the public forum to demonstrate support. So I have a client that I love dearly in long-term care. And my recommendation for them is have the foundation call your donors and say, could you start a letter writing campaign or write a letter or send a postcard into our residents? Because we're somewhat isolated here, as you might have noticed. And getting a handwritten note, so powerful, so powerful. So things that can be done by our donors. And I'll tell you, when you ask them to do those things, they will be thinking about the support that's required, and it's easy enough to include a footnote. If you're considering a donation, here's our link. But ask them to engage in different ways. All right, just checking for questions again. I love the comment, Korean. More humor, humanity, absolutely. Folks, you might have heard my voice go funny at some point. I do get choked up on some of the stuff because it's so important. I'm so passionate about this area. And I don't mind demonstrating the fact that it makes me emotional at times. We've all had these moments lately. Question bottom right, top organizational effectiveness or change support clients are asking for. The biggest one I'm seeing right now is, number one, how do I help our leaders do remote support because they're not used to it? I'm going to invert that and say, reality is we don't need managers looking over our shoulders so much. So what happens when you're working at a distance? You can see top left here, leaders leading virtual teams, remote work, tactical changes. The check-in is so critical. I cut a video on this, I think 2 weeks ago, but running that check-in and asking how people are doing with sincerity. There's a big difference between, hey, how are you doing? And Laura, how are you doing today? I'm thinking about you. I'm really concerned about you. Tell me. We create more of those moments where we can demonstrate sincerity. And I tell you, that is extremely powerful for our connection with employees and motivating them. How many times have we seen someone say, I so appreciated that word. I so appreciated that you stopped by. I so appreciated that you called. These are things that can be done in our organizations as much as they can be done with our neighbors. So, top questions are around how do I help my leaders manage their remote teams, connect with them? And then secondarily is, as we're seeing, how do I continue to drive change in this environment? I'm involved in some pretty significant change projects right now, and I can tell you every single one is full steam ahead with appreciation that some individuals are going to get called away or going to struggle with certain meetings because there's just so many things going on in the environment, but we are moving ahead. I encourage you to do so as well. All right, I'm going to go to my last slide. What's coming up? So we've covered off the first one, why people don't self-isolate. I've booked April 7th. I'll send that out to the entire group so you've got it. Attend if you can. Know that I'm going to record it, and I'll share everything that I'm sharing. So coming up, business continuity plans are broken. What is the role of change in black swan events? It is my belief that I'll be sharing that change leaders are perfectly suited to help within black swan events and, in fact, help the organization prepare for them. So we'll talk more about that. April 14th, why survivors matter, storytelling in crisis. I'm not going to tell you a lot about that, except that I've got some fascinating things to share with you. Mental is practical, rebuilding our capacity for change. I've already alluded to this, such an important aspect right now of how we're continuing to build our people up and help them recharge. Yet to put a date on it, driving change from a distance. Yes, you absolutely can do that. And finally, would love your feedback. I see, how many folks I still have on? 31 of you still out there. I'm thinking of adding a session that's wide open Q&A. I am thinking of adding a session that is specifically on leading our remote teams. Give me some feedback, folks. Use your chat box there and just let me know if those would be of interest. But the response to the series has been phenomenal. A lot more than I had expected, to be honest. I've got to do a shout out for leaders of some of our change management associations, getting the word out. Friends on LinkedIn, thank you. Please continue to share. These will continue to run at no cost, and I will continue to record them. And I see I'm getting some big votes of confidence coming up from folks. So good. I think that's a go then. So I'm going to wrap here and again say thank you, folks, for coming. I do not send out feedback sheets, but if you want to drop me a line, I'm sure most of you have my email or send something through the website. But I'll be in touch really soon with the replay link and also the slides and the schedule of next events. So thank you again, and feel free to pass this on.